After many years of struggle and people proclaiming that VR is dead or XR is dead, I feel like we are approaching a tipping point in adoption. Companies don't talk about the ways that they're using these technologies. The consumer adoption, industrial use, and the adoption by education. In the next year or so, things are really going to ramp up. Younger generations are, of course, more accustomed to digital environments through gaming. Children, and to a slightly lesser degree youth, have fewer constraints on their imagination. They haven't been taught to sort of tamp things down and keep it all practical. I like to say that the limits when it comes to XR are not the limits of the technology, they're the limits of the imagination.
You have a little bit of an unusual background, although I don't know what is usual these days, but you're coming from academia and now you're in an emerging tech space. Could you share a little bit about your journey from literature and higher education into your current role?
Sure, sure. Well, I can pull out threads that brought me to XR from my background that I didn't see for a long time. I thought it just seemed kind of odd and abrupt when I would look back on my change. But I've long had an interest in technology and how it can expand the possibilities for human creativity and the ways in which it figures into just about every sphere of life, including arts and humanities and literature. In my dissertation, I talked a little bit about electronic poetry and digital literature, which was super fascinating and very new at the time. Um, and I really became excited about XR, although we weren't calling it that at the time, VR, back around 2015. And that was particularly through the work of women artists who were using this technology. And I found what they were doing super exciting. And I saw the potential for the technology to allow people to tell their stories in really impactful ways. And I was also just going through a life change. And I made the decision to leave my job and to dive headfirst into XR in 2016. And I really haven't looked back since. It's been a bit of a rocky road, I will say, but it's very exciting, and I'm still passionate about the technology and its capabilities.
So XR is an umbrella term to include virtual reality, as you touched on, augmented reality, and mixed reality. And that maybe brings up a philosophical question, which your background in literature and academia might appreciate. What is reality? As you study executive coaching or psychology, you start to realize how many constructs we each have in our mind for our sense making, how much we're filtering in our vision, in our thoughts, and how that can compound. What have you learned about reality in air quotes?
Right. Well, gosh, we could probably dive in very deeply into the philosophy of that and, phenomenology and all kinds of other things. But I'll instead say that the experiences that we have in virtual worlds and in virtual environments are real. And very often they're shared with others, which kind of adds to the idea that they are real. And so the term reality, I think, is appropriate in virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality. Using that term makes sense. And there are ways in which these technologies sort of enhance our experience of the real world, but they're still part of it, I would say.
Fascinating. Well said.
There's a quote from the end of the Harry Potter series, and it's Harry's died and he's speaking to Dumbledore. And at the end of the conversation, he says, "Professor, did this conversation really happen, or did it just happen in my head?" And Dumbledore says, "Of course it happened in your head, but that doesn't mean it's not real." And I think that
Ah,
applies to everything we've spoken about there. Reality is really perception. And if VR or XR is allowing us to perceive different things in different ways, why would it not be real?
That's right. Yes, I agree. Thanks for that. I actually didn't see that. I didn't know about that,
Now
so
you know Harry
I'll
dies at the end.
remember it now.
He comes back, it's fine. Um, so, Karen, I wonder if you could expand a little bit on where you see XR now and where you see that it might take us and how quickly you think it might take us there.
Right, right. Well, I'm pretty excited because I see that after many years of struggle and people proclaiming that VR is dead or XR is dead, I feel like we are approaching a tipping point in adoption, and this is coming from a number of different places. Um, one of the things that's interesting is the rise of consumer AR or AR and AI glasses. The Meta Ray-Bans, for example, have been very, very successful. They are just AR glasses. They don't have a display, but Meta is working on a device called the Orion that will provide very sophisticated displays. And they showed that off at MetaConnect last September. And I've seen videos that they allowed out showing some of the things that this device could do. And the form factor is much more like everyday glasses that we might wear instead of a bulky VR headset. Um, Snap is putting out their spectacles in 2026. And of course, they have a huge following and a following of people who are used to applying filters in Snapchat. And so there are some really interesting possibilities for consumer use and adoption there. And they're partnering with a number of different companies, including Niantic, on that. And in terms of DR and MR, I really see corporate adoption ramping up very quickly. A lot of it has been going on in the background. Many companies don't talk about the ways that they're using these technologies, but we hear little snippets and we're finding out just how much it is being adopted. And, a few examples would be food manufacturing, retail operations, um, uh, energy companies that are adopting XR, using it for training. That's the most common use case, but they're also using it in other ways. And I'm seeing universities really lean into XR as well. And in some cases, with some very bold and exciting projects. And I think that with all of these things coming together, the consumer adoption, the industrial use, and the adoption by education, that in the next year or so, things are really going to ramp up and we're going to have a lot more recognition of the capabilities of XR and a lot more people using it.
What are some of the risks involved with XR?
Well, um, some of these risks are things that can be planned for and ameliorated. So device management and device life cycles is one thing. I think sometimes companies think, well, we invest in these devices and that's it. We've got them. We're going to use them for years and years and years. Well, that's not the way it works. Just like with computers and with cell phones, they need to be upgraded from time to time. So that's one risk. There are some risks in terms of privacy for employees, say in a company, or for the general public. And this is an important issue because VR has the ability to track our bodily movements, the way we move in space, and people can very easily be identified by those sorts of patterns. Of course, they are also collecting our voices, what we say in the place, and even in some cases, where we look. They use eye tracking to track our gaze in some cases. So there's a lot of potential for exploitation of personal information. I don't think that's a problem yet, but it is something that could be. So I think that is a risk. I know too that some CIOs don't like devices like the Meta Quest because it's an Android based device and they are just won't let it onto their networks. So dealing with that safety issue and the security issue is another risk for companies. And I think another risk is I'll say two more. One is that they try to adopt this technology without a thoroughly thought out plan, and therefore they fail in the way they're trying to use it or fail to have a sustainable program of adoption. And that is, of course, a loss of company resources. Also, for me, I think it's a shame for the XR industry itself.
On the other side, what are some of the benefits that you hope to unlock or that you're already seeing happen?
Well, conducting training in VR or MR allows workers to do tasks that could be dangerous for them and to practice them repeatedly and to have that experience before they actually go into a training experience that might actually put them at risk. That's a really important one. Sometimes in training, there are resources used that are very valuable. And if a trainee makes a mistake, it could be very costly. And so using these technologies allows these practice cases to happen without wasting those resources. One thing you can do with VR is to put people in situations that are impossible. For example, into a
Hmm.
building or structure that hasn't been built yet, hasn't been constructed. And another is for things that existed only in the past and are no longer around. And so it allows us to experience these environments that we simply can't in the physical world. And I personally am a strong believer in the capacity of technology in general, but also XR in particular, to expand the creative possibilities that we have. And that is super exciting to me. Giving artists and creative technologists the opportunity to make things that they could never have done before.
I always thought that the thing of being able to go back in time, as it were, in VR, there's something that exists already in Bruges, in Belgium. It was pretty bad when I went on it a while ago, but it's kind of like a ride that you put a helmet on and you see Bruges through the ages and they put smells on you as well and
Oh,
stuff, and it was amazing, even though it was quite clunky and quite bad. But if with today's technology, I'm sure that wouldn't even need to go to Bruges, could do it from home. We'd save on travel fares, and that's another benefit, I guess.
that's right. That's right. Yes, that sounds exciting. I don't know about that experience either, but I'd love to try it. I've never been to Bruges, and I hope I get the chance to. But if I don't, that would be a wonderful way to learn about it and experience it.
I was gonna ask, obviously vision can be VR and audio as well. Can the other senses at maybe now or in future, could they also be what would be the word? Can they be replicated? Can they be used as part of XR?
Absolutely, absolutely. Um,
like
haptics are
smell
al
or
yes, yes, I know
equilibrium?
people who have worked on smell in VR. In fact, my XR Women group had a booth at the Augmented World Expo this year, and on the other side of the curtain from us was a company that was creating smells for virtual reality, and so we got to smell them all. That was interesting. And haptics, or the sense of touch, is an important part of a lot of VR applications now. For example, one of the ways that I personally use VR is to work out. I meet a friend and we get into an app and we're there together in this workout experience, and we can socialize while we're exercising. And in some of the workouts, like for example, if you're doing boxing, there are cues that you hit, and when you hit them, your controller will will uh, send a signal, a haptic signal, a vibration to your hands, so it feels like something really happened there. And there are other ways. There are full body suits that can be rigged up to give you sensations in other parts of your body, or just vests. And for example, it's been used for firefighters to train them on the pressure of a fire hose and sort of what that feels like, and also to give them the sensation of heat if they're going into a burning building. Um, I think there have been I heard something recently about experiments with taste, but I don't think there have been as many of those.
So you've taught XR to children as young as 7 up through college. What do kids and young adults instinctively understand about immersive tech that adults might miss or are
Mhm.
slower on the uptake?
Yeah, wow. That's a great question. And I have put people into VR headsets up until their 80s. But in terms of teaching people to create using XR tools, yeah, it has been more with children and youth. Um, I think that they are younger generations are, of course, more accustomed to digital environments through gaming, whether on their phones or on their computers. And the idea of being in an environment, even if it's you are in an environment on your screen, and so moving around in a 3D space as an avatar. These are things that they kind of take for granted, and I think that some older people don't. I also think that children, and to a slightly lesser degree youth, have fewer constraints on their imagination. They haven't been taught to sort of tamp things down and keep it all practical. And the thing is, I like to say that the limits when it comes to XR are not the limits of the technology; they're the limits of the imagination in the ways it can be used. And so that's hugely important to bring a sense of creativity and imagination to the way that it is being used. And that's something that children and youth can teach us.
XR converges with a concept I've thought about for some time and saw demonstrated in this series on Netflix called Altered Carbon. And that is this like digitization of our consciousness that can be put
Mm.
into other bodies. So male, female, cross-racial, etc. Is this something that you see that could be used for like diversity training or something like that?
Oh, absolutely. And maybe not in precisely the way you're saying, you're describing there. But, for example, there's an app called Body Swaps that allows you to inhabit the avatar of another person. And it can be for things like uh, understanding another person's perspective, or it can also be for training, like if you were doing for a job interview, for professional development, that sort of thing. So you get to go back and see your avatar and listen to yourself respond from the perspective of the the faux interviewer. And there are a number of apps out there that are doing that sort of thing. There is a famous experiment that was run through the lab of Mel Slater in Barcelona, and it had to do with the sort of the phantom hand experience too. And, so there I believe what they did was, they had you sort of looking at your hand and sitting it there, and then they substituted a virtual hand for it and then did something to it, like smash down on it, and people would jump away. They really thought it was their hand, and I've had those experiences playing ping pong in VR, for example, and going for a shot and trying to lean on the table and it's not there, you know? You can almost fall. Um, but yeah, now and there are ways to with the incorporation of, AI avatars into virtual worlds, you could have a repository of recordings of a person that bot has been trained with and ask them questions. And these sorts of things are being done. For example, to preserve the memory of a loved one. Um, and there have been some really interesting projects done with Holocaust survivors and interviewing them and making sort of holographic representations of them as they tell their stories. That's a little bit different from you know putting someone into an avatar because that's really more of a representation of them. But uh, yeah, I think with the use of AI and AI is increasingly important in XR. It's almost you can't think about XR without AI at this point.
Yeah. I played a VR game that was pretty immersive and it was surreal. Like it was an out of body experience. Like you described with the hand smashing and stuff. And as far as interview training, that was made me think of this movie which I love, perhaps controversial statement, directed by Mary Harron, just for the record, called American Psycho. And Christian Bale is acting opposite Willem Dafoe. Willem Dafoe is a police investigator. Uh, Christian Bale's the titular character, and Mary Harron directed Willem Dafoe to act three different parts. So on one part, he suspects Christian Bale's guilty. On the other part, he's unsure. And on the other part, he just adores him or something like that, is taken in by his charm. And then she interspersed, like in the actual movie, she mixed them up. So you don't know which version is him, and you don't know exactly how to respond. So going back, a call back to earlier in our conversation with these constructs, if I'm low on blood sugar, if I have a call that's frustrating and I come into our conversation, I may be bringing some negative energy or some non-collaborative energy, and that might stress test your version of your day. And then you either ping pong that back to me, or through this virtual training, it sounds like it could train you to kind of keep Willem Dafoe just neutral, not necessarily reacting to him, and then get your point across. And I think that could be really helpful for, say, stage presentations or high stress job interviews. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. There is an app called Virtual Speech that was founded. It was created just for that purpose, for people to practice public speaking, because that's isn't that the number one fear, higher even than death among people, which I find a little bit odd, um, but it is the case, and so it allows you to go into different scenarios and practice speaking to an audience of avatars of varying sizes and different kinds of rooms. And this was created by a woman named Sophie Thompson, who had an intense fear of speaking in public. She even said that she couldn't even order her own coffee at Starbucks. And so she managed to overcome that, and she created this app to help other people who had the same sort of problem. Yeah.
Like you said, it's not the technology necessarily, it's our imagination or how we choose to use the technology as to what the limits of it are. Could it be possible that we end up spending more time in a virtual world than we do in reality? And what would that mean? What would be the benefits and risk of that?
Mhm, mhm, yeah. Well, if you think about the ways that we use our computers and our smartphones, you'll realize that we do spend many, many hours with those devices. And if we get to the point where we do have these devices that are a smaller form factor, more akin to regular glasses than the bulky VR headsets that we see now, and they can do similar sorts of things, it's totally realistic to think that we might spend most of our waking hours using those devices in various ways, maybe changing from an augmented reality setting on it if we're walking around on the street and we're seeing the directions to where we want to go in our vision instead of looking down at our phone and risking being hit by a car when we cross the street. Or we can get message notifications and we can listen to music with them. And so, I think in some ways, I hadn't thought about that before in terms of the number of hours that we might spend with these devices, but I think that is not unrealistic. In terms of what that means, I think that, as I said, we're already sort of tethered to our computers and our smartphones. And when a device allows us to not be focused on a small screen, but to be able to look around and have the world around us in our view, but also have all of this other digital information available to us, then I think it's simply going to be an enhancement of our daily lives.
Could you share one immersive project or that especially moved you or changed how you think about XR?
Well, I want to mention a concert by Fatboy Slim that was created in VR by the Engage team. Engage is an Irish company that has a VR platform, and it's one that I love and I use a lot. Um, but they worked with Fatboy Slim to create this concert, and they brought people in together in groups of about 50 people at a time. So we're all there together as avatars, and we start out being together in a like the parking lot of a diner setting, and there are motorcycles there, and you can get on the motorcycles and you can drive them around, and we were just socializing for a while, and then the music starts and all these other sorts of exciting things start happening. Massive eyeballs showing up and rolling around. People get able to get into those plastic balls that you see sometimes at performers use at concerts and roll around in them. We could do that as avatars, and they then took us on a journey through different sorts of scenes. In one, I found myself when we transported over there on the hood of a pickup truck, dancing in a caravan of all these other vehicles with all the other people who were there, moving to another location. We There was a part with Sasquatches running around, and we could jump on their shoulders and ride them. Um, there was we went back to the diner at one point, and we were small characters on the counter looking up at massive waitress and line cook having an argument above us. But there were also little cockroaches. Well, not little for us from our perspective, but there were cockroaches running around there, and we could get onto those cockroaches and fly them around. And one section of it even had a skydiving experience. We were skydiving in formation. S- So, yeah, so the possibilities for entertainment are absolutely incredible. That was an experience. This was, it was a couple of years ago, at least, and when I went through it, I was with a lot of my friends also working in XR, and we're you know, very experienced in being with in VR and seeing some pretty amazing things, but this blew our minds. Um, it was one of the
Sounds
most
like it.
exciting I've seen. Yeah.
From a business standpoint, what's been one of your hardest professional pivots or challenges in XR, and how did you navigate through it?
Oh, wow. It is difficult sometimes to convince some people of the benefits and utility of XR, and even ones who are sometimes tasked with exploring it and trying to bring it into a company. And so that has been something that I have faced, that I have found challenging, trying to work with someone to get something going at a company when they really don't fully believe in it themselves. And one of the ways I worked to overcome that was to identify other people who did get it at that same company, and who were in positions of influence, and to
Mm.
uh, bring their perspectives to bear on it to help this other person understand uh, the benefits, and that they shouldn't be trying to uh, think that the project won't work, um, but instead leaning into it.
Yeah, it sounds like the benefits outweigh the risks, for the most part, at least for on a trial basis. So, I'm curious, for creatives, like you mentioned, educators or technologists curious about XR, where should they start?
Oh, wow. Um, so first of all, they need to, buy a headset and start trying out as many experiences as possible. And there are a number of events and organizations. Once you start getting into the network, you can find out about webinars, about meetups in VR, conferences such as the Augmented World Expo, which I mentioned earlier, which takes place. The U.S. version takes place in June. My
Hmm.
organization, XR Women, is another great way for people to get started in the industry. We hold weekly events in VR, often on the Engage platform, but sometimes others, including web based platforms such as Frame VR and Arrival Space. We use a number of different ones. And these events feature women who are working in the industry talking about their work. And we want to make the environment and the experience as welcoming as possible. So even people who aren't that experienced and maybe feel a little bit nervous, we want to help them sort of onboard and to make the connections with others that will allow them to learn and feel more confident as they progress through their journeys. LinkedIn is a wealth of information about XR, so that's another great place to start.
With your founding of XR Women, what is the reason for the focus on the gender women? Is there a unique way in which they use it, or does it help them in a certain way that, say, XR men wouldn't? I'm curious.
Well, I mean, women use it in such a wide variety of ways, and we've had women speakers who are working in industry and different kinds of manufacturing industry. A lot of educators, artists, technologists themselves. There are many ways in which women use the technology, and it may be that many of us do a little less of the first person shooter type experiences. Uh, but the reason for founding XR Women was that back in 2020, late 2020, some friends and I were seeing that women were not being given the spotlight or the microphone. We would see panels about XR and conferences and webinars that featured all male speakers. And even on panels with, 4 or more people, there weren't women on them, but we knew that those women were out there and were doing really interesting work that was worthy of being exposed. And so we decided we would give them an opportunity to practice their speaking, their professional speaking and presentation skills, um, so that no one could say that, oh, they're just not a good speaker, so we're not going to invite them on, and to do so in a supportive environment and get feedback, but also as a way of sort of amplifying their voice. When we learn about what one another is doing, then we can uh, do what we sometimes say, which is to speak her name in a room full of opportunities. And so we can
Hmm,
amplify
I like that.
the voices of others in our community.
Yeah, on the topic of women in XR, is it something that so I heard you say that men are in those spaces, they just might not be represented in those spaces or talk about it. Is it something that right now, is it mainly in the gaming space? Do you think that might be why it is more kind of men dominant? Or as XR grows to encompass loads of other areas, will women more naturally be included in those spaces, do you think?
Hmm, hmm. Yes, yeah. Well, I think that there are some sort of toxic and anti women cultures in gaming, unfortunately. Uh, but I also think that this idea that VR or XR is mostly for gaming is going to change soon, as I said, and that you sort of alluded to that yourself, Becky, that as we see these use cases emerging in education, in industry, in entertainment of various kinds, that yeah, you probably will see more women getting involved. Unfortunately, women who are entrepreneurs in the space, just like other women entrepreneurs, face incredible challenges when it comes to getting venture capital funding. Right now, the amount of VC funding that goes to women is, I believe, just under 2%, not even 20%, but 2%, which is absolutely shocking. And so I do see some women in the space struggling with that. They're forced to bootstrap, which may ultimately make their companies stronger if they can survive those first phases. But very often we see large sums of money thrown at men for projects that really aren't that well uh, thought out, not much more than an idea, and it is incredibly imbalanced, and that's a big problem because if we have all men creating the experiences, we're not going to have the diversity that will appeal to all people, and these devices will become more and more accessible to more people, as I've said, as the form factor changes and they become more like eyeglasses that we wear on a regular basis.
So that's going to take a bit of a pivot. Out of interest, are there any applications of XR within healthcare?
I was just going to ask the same thing.
Crayons.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yes, and those range from a project that I worked on with a large healthcare machinery manufacturer using a an animated 3D interactive experience to train technicians to maintain and repair uh, those that equipment. Um, to wellness apps and experiences that give you sort of a meditative experience and allow you to regulate your emotions or your brain waves to using VR for pain relief. There are some experiments going on with that at the University of Pittsburgh right now, and there have been some in the past for children in burn units who can't really be given the sorts of drugs that adults can to help with pain relief. And so putting them into a snowy environment where there is a game allows them to be distracted from the pain. There's surgical training and surgical assistance
Mm.
using various kinds of uh, devices. And there's also education about things like microbiology that allows you to interact with the microbes in a very different way and to understand them. So those are a few examples. And coming back to the children, I just want to say that the Academy of Immersive Arts and Sciences, which is another nonprofit I am involved with that I co-founded, um, we run an annual charity golf tournament called um, Ready Player Golf. And it takes place in November in the Walkabout mini golf app. So we are conducting this tournament in VR. It's a mini golf tournament in VR, but it's for charity. And it benefits the Children's Cancer Research Fund. And in particular, a program that provides children with the opportunity to use XR and to create with it to give them some joy in the middle of the really awful circumstances that they find themselves, as well as some of the funds going to the research itself. So, yeah, those are a few ways where there's a connection to healthcare.
Pie in the sky. If you could create any XR experience tomorrow with unlimited budget and unlimited time, what would it be?
Oh my goodness. I think it would be one in which we could at will sort of and we this is as I'm saying this, I'm thinking it's almost possible right now, and in some cases using AI bots. So an AI bot in a virtual environment, you can have it create a skybox for you. You can give it just ask it, speak to it, and ask it to create a skybox for you. A skybox is like the environment that you find yourself in, the like the sky or the walls and the ceiling of the room. You can ask it to bring in a 3D object or an image, and all sorts of things that you can do with these bots in terms of creation. So I was going to say that it would be an experience that would allow you to sort of seamlessly transition from one type of environment to another, and to create, even for those of us like me who really don't have any artistic skills, and but I also like a personal element, and for me, VR is very much a social experience. Some people say that it's isolating. I don't find that to be the case at all. It's where I go to meet my friends who are all over North America and other places in the world, and we can gather together in real time. So I think more environments that facilitate that sort of thing and can bring people together. Um, I would create something of that sort, improving on the current platforms that are available, I think.
Where can people follow what you're doing and get in touch with you?
Well, I am on LinkedIn as Karen F. Alexander. That's F as in Frank. And that's probably the social media platform I use the most. Um, I can be reached at Karen at xrconnected.com. XR Women is xrwomen.com. And we have a strong LinkedIn presence as well. Everyone is welcome to come to our events, and everyone is welcome to join our organization for free. If people don't identify as women or as non binary, they can join as allies. and we love our allies, and we welcome them into our community. The Academy of Immersive Arts and Sciences is at academyimmersive.org. So those are a few ways to find me and the organizations I'm part of.
Excellent. We'll put those in the chat in the show notes as well. Well, thank you, Karen, for taking us on a very imaginative and expansive journey. It reminds me a little bit of Inception, where they're creating these dream worlds and exploring them. And I look forward to our future.
Great. Thank you so much, David. Thanks for having me.
Thanks,
Thank you,
Jen.
Pleasure.
Becky.